All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, I thought that I had already seen the absolute worst possible arguments against waiving patent protections on the coronavirus vaccine. Currently, of course, rich nations like the U.S. are blocking a World Trade Organization proposal which would temporarily lift IP protections as poorer nations like India are seeing horrifying new waves of the virus and struggling with woefully insufficient supply of that vaccine. As I covered last week, Bill Gates just flat out lied about lifting the patent protection, saying it would do nothing to increase production, when, of course, that is complete and utter nonsense. Then there was this, flagged by friend of the show, Matt Stoller. Pharmaceutical executives have apparently been making the case that, quote, giving up the IP rights could allow China and Russia to exploit platforms such as mRNA, which could be used for other vaccines or even therapeutics for conditions such as cancer and heart problems in the future. So did you catch that? They are worried that China or Russia might use this technology to cure cancer. Imagine being such a sociopath with a hard-on for a new Cold War that you actually think another nation curing cancer or heart disease is a disaster to be avoided at all costs. But we've got a new entrant into the category of worst person ever, making the worst case ever. Allow me to introduce you to Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, and by the way, one of Joe Biden's closest allies in the Senate. According to the Washington Post, Coons recently told a DC think tank that we've got to hoard those vaccine property rights in the name of unity after the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, saying, all of this is a wake-up call for us that we need to have another Sputnik-like moment of reinvestment in American innovation and competitiveness. A central part of being successful in this competition is continuing with our constitutionally created protected property right of a patent. Now, there is so much to be horrified by in this statement that I really want to break it all down. First off, in his lusting for another Sputnik-like moment, Coons is actually making the exact same argument as those pharma lobbyists, saying that it would be terrible if China or Russia was able to cure cancer before we did. This is the absolute worst brand of nationalism, in that this ideology would literally sacrifice millions of lives upon the altar of making sure our geopolitical foes don't score a technological win. It's also quite a revealing statement because, in truth, quite a few politicians long for the clarity and unity and imperial militarism of the Cold War. The Cold War was extraordinarily effective, after all, at crushing collective solidarity in favor of a unity that says the only ideology permitted is one in which Coca-Cola, blue jeans, and capitalism are all amazing. All of the organs of the deep state were at the height of their power and glory during the Cold War. The bipartisan consensus around wars, tax cuts, and bad trade deals remained unchallenged. And by the way, Senator Coons seems to be echoing the new Cold War framing that Biden himself seems to be workshopping.
We can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus.
Now, one way you might win the 21st century is by being the world leader in helping to end a global pandemic that has deadly consequences in every part of the globe. Apparently, however, in Senator Coons' conception, winning looks like hoarding, cruelty, and domination. To win, Coons said to that think tank, we need to, quote, continue our constitutionally created protected property right of a patent. I'm sorry, what? As I've said now about 1,000 times on this show, the mRNA technology was developed with U.S. taxpayer dollars. In fact, every single new pharmaceutical in the past decade was developed with U.S. taxpayer dollars. Big Pharma doesn't deserve protected property rights because it wasn't their property to start with. So please point me to the place in our Constitution where it says that amoral multinational behemoths have a right to take our public goods and reap billions in private sector profits from them. And how does taking our public goods and turning them into private commodities for the benefit of wealthy executives, how does that make us a stronger country exactly? I suppose that this is just the sort of logic that might get you a lot of donors and political power representing a state like Delaware, a state, by the way, that seems to exist for the sole purpose of making toxic chemicals and serving as a home for tax-dodging companies. Seriously, Delaware is literally home to more corporate entities than it is to people. But what really takes Coons' comments to the next level is how he invokes January 6th as a reason to hoard vaccines. In his addled formulation, the riots showed we need unity, which apparently means protecting the profit margins of our glorious corporations at all costs. Actually, now that you mention it, I guess that is pretty much what these politicians always mean when they call for unity. Everyone put a cork in that unpatriotic dissent. We need to make sure a tiny handful of executives and their shareholders continue to thrive. It's about national unity or something. It also reveals how the worst actors in D.C. will use the bad deeds of the other side in order to quash dissent and cover for their own bad deeds forever. January 6th is going to be invoked 1,000,000 times to expand surveillance, normalize militarization, and fuel cable news ratings, and also apparently to justify putting profits over lives. And again, Chris Coons is not just some senator. He is considered to be Joe Biden's voice in the Senate. Whatever he is saying to D.C. think tanks, he is also saying directly to Biden. Right now, the Biden administration is apparently evaluating whether to side with Bill Gates, Chris Coons, and Big Pharma, or to listen to the activists and moral leaders like the Pope on the side of a people's vaccine. The horrifying nature of the arguments against the people's vaccine should tell you everything you need to know about how easy a decision this should actually be. And I want to say here, the reporting is that the Biden administration is pretty torn right now. They're not sure what direction to go in. But the fact that he's using January 6th to justify keeping patent protections on the coronavirus vaccine is incredibly revealing and just like completely bonkers.
Well, you knew it was coming. It's like Russia during
Trump
years. You can say it for whatever you want. And I think this is important. And look, I mean, I have a different perspective, which is like I consider myself an American nationalist. But if you want to project American power across the globe and consider it a Cold War thing, well, Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine, is a disaster. It's so bad.
Exactly.
The Brazilians and everybody in South America who got it are like, this is terrible, man. It's basically not even enough in order to trigger an antibody response. And Chinese state media has had to do this whole campaign in order to sort of whitewash how good it is.
But actually think about that, because think about their approach is their vaccine is shitty, but they're like, we're going to give our vaccine out to the world because this is actually a way to have power and to build credibility in the world.
That's the point I'm making, which is actually anti-American sentiment in India, I can tell you anecdotally, is rising quite a bit, especially over this vaccine IP issue. And they're basically like, look, we stood with you, against China, and we thought we were geopolitical allies, and our people are dying. Like, why are we not having full court press? Like, the India is a natural ally to the United States and South Asia, if this is the strategy that you want to counter. And there's quite a bit of anger at people like Bill Gates and more. You covered that story about Bangladesh and that factory which is sitting idle. These are all things which people in India can tell you quite clearly because they have a very low vaccination rate. Luckily, my grandparents are all vaccinated, but anecdotally, family, pretty much everybody knows someone who has died or who is very, very sick at this moment.
And it's really worrying some of the voices that are around Biden on this. Because again, look, they seem torn right now. Granted, we're over 100 days in and they're continuing the Trump administration policy of keeping the patent protection in place and basically serving pharma's interests, saying, let's use the COVAX program, which again protects pharma profits, and has been a complete and utter failure that was pushed by Bill Gates. But you not only have Chris Coons, you also have Steve Ricchetti, who's top aide, counselor to the president, and his brother, in their old lobbying firm that they had together, has been lobbying the executive office of the president on similar issues for Big Pharma. So you have these direct connections. You know that they're making this case. And you know that Biden, because he's also thinking about this framing of like democracies versus autocrats, the reason that they're using that framing is because they think that's going to appeal to Biden, because that's the way he's looking at the world right now. And look, so even if you view the world that way, I think that's the big point, is like, to think that it's serving U.S. national strategic interest in the name of patriotism and, being able to assert our will around the globe to protect these patents and keep poor countries from being able to have access to a cheap vaccine and greater supply. I just think that's completely backwards of how this thing actually worked, even if you buy into that Biden framing.
Look, if it's a limited supply and you don't have enough doses, it's a different story.
Right.
But
That's not where we
That's
are.
not, right? We have 600 million doses. You have enough doses in order to get vaccinated twice in America. So in that particular case, then it is probably, not probably, almost definitely the best thing you can possibly do in order to make sure the rest of the world does get vaccinated. Look, this is our government. We created this technology. We funded it. We created probably the most significant scientific achievement within a year since the Apollo missions. That's really how you should be thinking about the mRNA vaccine, the technology, and more. And just like that was a beacon of hope for a lot of people, I think this is one of those direct things that goes right into you, and which you can see a demonstrable impact on your life. So from that perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's like you said, the Chinese know it. They just have shittier technology.
Right.
But even they're engendering quite a bit of goodwill. They've been doing this in Africa for a long time, just flying their little or getting their little ship around and performing surgeries and stuff for the local people.
Russia takes the same
Russia
approach.
does the same thing. And I'm not saying any of that is bad. If they want to cure people or whatever, but they're not the altruistic people. Nobody is either. But look, if we've got the tech, if we've got the vaccine, there's no reason that you shouldn't use it for the same end.
All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.